Hi everyone, and welcome to this live discussion that I'm hosting through Spicy by Design. Today's discussion is all around PIP and the changes that have been announced recently by the government to kind of look at how PIP is awarded and how this affects disabled people and neurodivergent people. I'm joined today by some of the staff from Citizens Advice BCP, which is Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. Allow them to introduce themselves in a second. I'm also joined by Mark Webb, who's a disability rights advocate. I'm Chandy. I'm the host of this discussion today. I'm a white male wearing a white polo top. I have a ginger beard and curly brown hair. Mark, I'll ask you to briefly introduce yourself.
Yep. So you heard I'm a disability activist, lived experience. My flavour of disability is advanced multiple sclerosis. So visually, you can see a white middle-aged chap with brown hair, a bald patch behind the camera, and a flowery shirt. Below the camera is a wheelchair, and I'm going to wave it in front of the camera, a suprapubic catheter. So I wee out of my tummy. Charming.
Thank you, Mark. Tom?
Hi, everyone. So I'm Tom Lund. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a tall white male with a shaved head and a short beard. Today, I'm wearing a red T-shirt and a blue Citizens Advice lanyard.
Thank you. And your colleague in the office with you?
Haley?
Hey, I'm Haley. I'm a white wheelchair user with glasses and a black top.
Thank you. And Jamie?
Hi, I'm Jamie. I'm a 6 foot tall white male with short blonde hair, blue eyes, and a golden beard. I'm currently wearing a navy shirt.
Thank you all for doing that. So just before we start recording, Mark, you asked the question, how kind of forceful, like how are we approaching this? And so today's discussion is just going to be an open and honest conversation around the frustrations that disabled people and neurodivergent people have with PIP, because it is a hard process to get through, even before the changes were announced through government. As we stand, I know that there's going to be a review into PIP, so it's no longer on the bill, as I understand it from my discussions with my local MP. But obviously it still caused a lot of frustration and a lot of kind of anxiety and stress, especially for myself, because I don't meet the new criteria, so I would lose all of my PIP. But enough about me. So my first question to you guys is, what are some of the most common barriers that people face when trying to navigate the PIP process? I guess, Mark, I'll come to you first. With speaking to disabled people and you being disabled yourself, what are some of the barriers that you face?
So my PIP journey started an awful long time ago. So memory loss being one of my MS symptoms, I try to cast back to thinking about it. And the huge hurdle, the two hurdles I faced really were the 40 page form filling in. I was bad enough then. Now this is my kind of natural hand thing. So just filling in the form, trying to get my foggy brain to focus on it, both actually filling in honestly and correctly, and being terrified of the results, and actually being physically challenged to write my the PIP was a big challenge. And then actually the whole fear factor around failure to win through, to get what I felt I deserved. Those were the two challenges that I personally can recall.
And Tom, when you're speaking to people through your service, what are some of the things that you hear about them experiencing when they're trying to apply for PIP and even go through the kind of review process? Is there any barriers that they face?
So I think, very similar to what Mark was touching on. Our biggest concerns are how complex and lengthy the application form is and the whole process for people. Additional to that is the lack of accessible information and guidance to support people. So in terms of supporting people, Mark touched on it about how difficulty it can be for many people physically to complete the application form. And understanding where you can get that assistance, where you can get that guidance is particularly difficult. And it is stressful. People that we talk to often refrain from coming to us almost till the point of crisis, if that makes sense. So it's the fear and the inconsistency that they hear from friends, family members, colleagues about how inconsistent the whole assessment process can be. And then on top of that, one of the things that we find particularly within Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole is around digital exclusion. So people who don't have access to IT in the same way that other people might have access, or they just simply don't understand the whole process of everything going digital. And it just leaves people without the sort of the vital financial support that they need, and it forces them to cut back on essentials like food, heating, and various other things that we rely on as human beings.
I think a theme that I'm picking up from both of you is that kind of the disabled people want to be seen and heard and acknowledged for their impairments and what they're going through, but there seems to be a barrier in terms of I know they've made adjustments in making the application online for new claimants, but not for review claims. But even the understanding of how it is to read a form and to know what to put. You said, Mark, around having that belief in is what I'm putting down factual and correct. And even from when I first applied for PIP, it was, is it a good day or a bad day? And now it's most of the time. And that's not really been conveyed to a lot of people, because I still speak to friends and stuff. And it's like, do I put good day, bad day? Like, what do I put? Because a good day could be every day for a week, and then I have 2 weeks of bad days. So how do you convey that to someone who is then going to make a decision on whether you're disabled most of the time or not, when we know that disability doesn't have an on-off switch? Jamie or Hayley, is there anything you want to add?
I think from my perspective, and just following up from what you're saying, Chandy, when you look at the questions within the application, they will kind of suit perhaps one disability or another, just touching on the good days and bad days. I mean, in terms of looking at undressing and dressing, obviously that will it's a very limited scope of daily activities, which you're judging based on someone's kind of day-to-day life of how they deal with things, and it's a very small scope of activities. Obviously, just what you guys have said before in terms of how long the application process is, how accessible it is, and it's just the accessible support out there and the reliance on other organizations to provide this support. And of course, it is just really hard to get the information out to the community to make sure they are aware of what they're entitled to. I think the scope to disability price tag report, so that's basically the cost of basically a household which has a disability, and that's about £1,095. PIP on the enhanced rates per month doesn't cover that, so the new changes obviously are concerning.
And in terms of the kind of leading into question 2, from what we know about the proposed changes to PIP and universal credit, what are some of the concerns that you hear from people, or that you have yourself? And I guess specifically around neurodivergence, obviously the criteria is very focused on kind of physical disability, and the hidden disability aspect is often overlooked when a lot of neurodivergent people rely on PIP. I myself am also neurodivergent, and I have OCD, anxiety, and some of the criteria I meet because of that. And if it changes, I'm going to lose out. I'm still disabled. I still have those impairments. So Tom, I guess, what are some of the concerns that you've heard from people in terms of them being neurodivergent, or that you've from your research and stuff?
So I think one of the sort of the most serious concerns we've heard from neurodivergent communities and people with neurodivergent conditions is primarily focused around the stricter eligibility rules for PIP. I mean, some of the things that Jamie's touched on, and bearing in mind, in terms of statistics, and I think Hayley's got the actual statistics, or Jamie's got the statistics for the number of neurodivergent people that actually access support. It's a concern that it's not just the changes to PIP, it's the cuts to the universal credit health element. It's the loss of the linked support, which concerns us. So, unpaid carers who are supporting potentially neurodivergent people and people with other disabilities, is that, the potential cuts to things like carers allowance within households and support mechanisms and everything else puts a lot of people at risk. And that does include, people with arthritis, neurodivergent people with chronic pain, other mental health conditions, women, older adults, families, particularly with disabled children as well, and those in coastal towns like BCP and other deprived areas.
And for you, Mark, what are kind of, because I know when I first reached out to you around being part of this discussion, and we talked about neurodivergence and the kind of mental health aspect of that, what for you is some of the, how's the proposed changes impacted you and your concern around how that might affect your own PIP claim?
Yeah, so of course, I was reassured when the government finally caved on part of the pressure, so that those with existing claims seem to be currently staying consistent. Although my disease is both fluctuating, but it's progressive. So I'm confident I'd get this famous 4, the score that you need to get the full allowance for my advanced disability. My concern is it's a fact, and you probably all know this stat, but 83% of people become disabled. So I'm thinking about the next generation, and I'm thinking about my children, not just my children, but roughly speaking, and I've told my children this, but I had a 1 in 700 chance of developing MS, as does anybody between the ages of 20 and 40. Them being my children, they've got a 1 in 70 chance of being diagnosed with MS, and it just terrifies me that they won't get the even basic 1,000, the 600-700 quid, whatever it is, that just allows us to partially survive. So I'm just thinking about the next generation, and just suddenly that they're not allowed basic human dignity.
One thing, I spoke to my MP about this, and I said, it's most of the people that claim PIP are in work. I know there was a push by the government, both this current government and the previous government, to kind of say that it's better to be in work, which, yes, to some extent, but obviously we know that workplaces aren't always accessible to disabled people. And my PIP helps me to get into work. It helps me pay for things that make my life more accessible so that I can be in employment, whether that be part-time or not. Have you, Tom, at BCP Citizens Advice, heard anything around that, or Jamie, and how people are frustrated around that?
I think if I can just add, Chandy, and just on your previous point as well about sort of neurodivergent people as well. I mean, just to counter some of the arguments that are being presented. I mean, only on the basis of some of the statistics that we've looked at since I think they were done around about January this year. Only 31% of neurodivergent people are in employment, compared to around about 55% of people with other conditions. And I think part of the problem with that is the delay in terms of diagnosis, from diagnosis to to being able to provide medical evidence and things like that. The reality of it is this is not it's not an in-work benefit. It's not there for people in work, and Hayley would probably have quite a lot to say on this in terms of sort of what PIP is used for and what people use PIP for, and it's certainly not to an in-work benefit. And I think similar to because I know Mark feels the same and you do too, Chandy, is that we really dislike that rhetoric being used at the moment, that it's an in-work benefit and it's a benefit to encourage people in work.
Yeah, I joked with Chandy that I was going to start every sentence I started on this call. PIP is not a work benefit.
Yeah, it's frustrating, and I think it's that kind of rhetoric that kind of pushes the discrimination, the ableist belief that we are kind of a burden for needing financial support, when really other way I've described it to people is that without the PIP payment, I'd be even more of a kind of quote unquote burden, because I'd need to use up other services or be dependent on other things and other people. Hayley, what are your thoughts on this? And
Well, I was just gonna add that I think the current system and what they were talking about, it does miss out a lot of like younger people, because they're talking about with the UC and the PIP, they're not people won't be accessing it till after they're 22, but that doesn't mean that the people that means that the people that were born with the conditions up to them are not getting the support that they would currently do now. So I feel like we are missing out either the younger and the older groups as well.
and Hayley,
And also, I think going back to the point about it's not a work benefit, but I don't think a lot of people realise how much people that work full time or part time use PIP to allow them to be able to get into work, and the additional costs that other people don't need to think about. And I think all of this, even with the review being postponed, is put a lot of stress on people like myself with lived experience, but we see it from all the clients coming into us. And even though they were happy that the review is happening, it doesn't take away the amount of stress that they've been under just with the talk about the changes. So we're aware of how much stress this has caused without even having the outcome yet. So
one thing that I found kind of a bit of hope when I was looking at all of the discussion around today and stuff, and wanting to not just be negative all the time. One thing I spoke to my MP about was that the idea that those with chronic long-term conditions would have less assessments, which for me, like having an assessment every 2-3 years is draining, because I then have to kind of go through the paperwork again. I have to know what to put, and it's exhausting. And as someone who overthinks and has a lot of anxiety around kind of how things are worded and kind of the structure of things, I will ruminate on stuff for weeks. And so writing the PIP form is just one element, but then it's the waiting for them to get back with an assessment date. It's having the assessment. I asked for someone to be on my phone call with me as an advocate, and there was a lot of kind of, why do you need someone with you? Can you not speak for yourself? And there's a lot of assumptions that are held within kind of the assessment side of things on disabled people and on neurodivergent people. From your guys' kind of work and what you guys do, what do you think are some of the shortfalls in kind of the assessment process, and especially with people with hidden disabilities or fluctuating conditions? Jamie, if I come to you first.
Yeah, no. So I think it's important to say with the assessments, obviously you go into the assessment and you get assigned a medical profession. That medical professional may not be an expert in kind of your field of health. And of course, if you have multiple impairments, it's very unlikely that you'll get that as well. So I feel that with the way the current assessments are done, you're kind of getting an expert in something completely different, who generally does a lot of feedback we get is that, well, I presented well at my assessment, I kind of maintained eye contact, but I was unsuccessful in my award. And I think it's very much, it's almost that client feedback saying, you know, it feeds into that you have to go in on your worst day and hope that you get a kind of a medical professional in your field. Obviously, that's a lot of feedback that we kind of get in. But you know, as Hayley says, the amount of stress that it causes, just kind of the build up into the assessments, is massive. I mean, we're lucky enough to work in a kind of a workplace with kind of a workforce with multiple kind of mental health conditions across the board, and it's great for myself because I get to learn across each kind of on how it affects each one. But you also see kind of the dramatic of effect of kind of that PIP review letter coming in. You see kind of an assessment needed that causes massive panic and massive spike in anxiety and stress, which obviously is detrimental. But no, with the assessment process, just going back to that, it really is, you almost feels like you have to present on your worst day and kind of be very lucky with the assessor at times.
And I think one of the other issues, Chandy, that we've kind of identified as well, that we see sort of day in, day out, is the over-reliance on physical tasks. And I think, you know, as you mentioned with fluctuating and sort of hidden conditions, is that it can be different. Even, you know, we talk about good days and bad days, but, you know, there can be good moments and bad moments. And like Jamie said, you know, to make a decision on the basis of somebody looking somebody else in the eye and then, you know, saying, well, you know, their mental health ability is okay because they were able to look me in the eye, you know, is ludicrous to think that would be, you know, a trigger for success or otherwise, you know, or you know, a low score or a high score on a particular assessment. And I think, you know, it is about sort of the inadequate consideration of you know, the reliability of the assessments, the impact, like Jamie said, you know, it's rare you will get somebody who understands multiple impairments. It's rare that you will get somebody who knows that. And arguably, you know, it's the same process that we often see where we're almost setting people up for a mandatory reconsideration and then going through the whole appeals process. You know, it's almost like people, you know, there's an expectation, well, I'm not going to get through it the first time, but then I'll go to appeal. You know, you imagine what that's costing the state. You know, again, it just becomes ludicrous that, you know, you kind of have an expectation, I'm going to fail the first time, but when I push it forward and, you know, the volume, the money that's been spent there, so the money that, you know, arguably this will save. And, you know, we don't deny that, you know, savings have to be made across various areas of social welfare and everything else. The reality of it is there's better places to make these savings. And I think, you know, it's the lack of consideration against that. And, you know, the fact of humanizing and using a holistic assessment process and making it person-centered. You know, accepting medical evidence, accepting lived experience, you know, which obviously, you know, Mark and Hayley, accepting that lived experience and, you know, including mental health indicators as well. You know, these sort of things, none of this is rocket science really, but I think in terms of bureaucracy and red tape, it somehow always hits a bit of a brick wall. And we're hoping that the Timms review is going to, you know, look at this and see this and, you know, recognise that these things are needed.
And for you, Hayley, what are some of the kind of shortfalls that you think exist within the assessment process?
I mean, some of them have been mentioned by Jamie and Tom, but also just the process takes too long. And obviously it's confusing. And then you mentioned yourself, like you have to get reassessed regularly, because when I was first on DLA, I was given lifetime award, but now I have to get reassessed every 3 years. So I've got the lived experience of that. And even though now I work full time, it's still a stressful experience for me.
Yeah.
Having to go through the process, despite not having at the moment to rely on that money as much as I used to have to do. So,
thank you. I think.
Sorry, Chandy, and I was just going to say I haven't been reassessed for about a decade, and I've never had a communication to tell me that I won't be reassessed. So. One of the other issues is it's supposed
inconsistency, Mark. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, absolutely. But just as a quick counterpoint, when I was assessed, it was face to face at the time. I know things have changed, but I met a thoroughly nice, understanding chap who listened to me, and he granted me my PIP straight away, or, you know, promptly. So I just want to counterpoint everybody's anxiety, which is almost automatic for us all. And if I'm ever reassessed, I'll still be anxious, even though I know I will pass. But you can have a decent outcome sometimes.
And it is to say as well that you do have, as a disabled person, you have rights, so you can have someone with you in the assessment, whether that's a face-to-face one or telephone assessment. And also, you, under the Equality Act, you can ask for reasonable adjustments.
Yeah.
So, for example, if someone's asked to have a face-to-face assessment, but it's not physically possible because of anxiety or because of physical health, you can ask for it to be moved to a telephone assessment under the Equality Act if it's a reasonable adjustment. So you have to have reason for that to happen. But there are legal rights, and as Tom said earlier, the mandatory consideration is just one element. You can also go to tribunal if you then don't get the decision, and then any pay is backdated as well. So I know it can be a long process, but there are some kind of safeguards and stuff and some hope for disabled people. Just going back to what Hayley said around the frustration and stuff, and again what you said, Mark, I had my assessment earlier this year, and they did like a little bit at the start of the call where they go through like, so are you working, do you have a degree? I was like, I have a degree, yeah. So I told them, and then I was like, is this going to be used in my application? Because it's not part of the kind of structure of the form. And they were like, oh no, it's just to get an understanding of you as a person. And then later on there's a section on going out, and they were like, can you read a bus timetable? I said yes, but I get a lot of anxiety, I forget things. And I went into a lot of detail, and I saw the assessment afterwards, and it said he has a degree, so he can read a bus timetable. And that was used quite a lot throughout the assessment, like he has a degree, so you can do this. But it's not to take into account that I wasn't able to get a degree because of my support program, and because I had like TAs and I had like equipment to help me get through the degree, to proofread and stuff. And so although there are a lot of shortfalls, as we've said, you can ask for the help to get you through that process. And there's organizations like Citizens Advice that can help, and other charities that offer kind of form completion services where they can help you kind of get through the process. One thing also I noticed that the forms don't often give you a lot of space to write information. It's often like 2 or 3 lines. So I'd always like recommend getting an A4 bit of paper on a Word document and just writing everything down on that, and then attaching that as a separate document, because that gives you more space to get into more detail. What advice would you, Citizens Advice, Tom, or Jamie or Hayley, give to someone who's trying to get through the process?
Well, I mean, you've touched on quite a few, Chandy, from my perspective, and it is about seeking out help with completing the forms. I think, I think we have a responsibility, and so do statutory services, to make sure that, that people have clear information. They have the information about their rights and their entitlements. As we previously touched on, PIP isn't means tested, and it can be, it can be claimed whether whether or not you work, and that decisions can be challenged. More people need to know that. I think, it's great. I think emotional and moral support is essential as well, really, that knowing that there are people out there. The difficulty is sometimes the capacity of the organizations that are providing the help. I mean, it's for example, with Citizens Advice, it's right across the benefit system, and there are challenges in every benefit that exists in our welfare system, and in a sense, it's about, keep trying to get that support, keep trying to get that advice. And much like Mark said, there are positives to a lot of this. We're not an organisation that's saying the system is an absolute mess and everyone working within the system hasn't got a clue. We know there are people that care. We know, we don't think that the TIMS review would have happened if people didn't care. I mean, you look at, the backbench push to rethink this and reassess this. We're very proud of a lot of our ministers that, stood up and said, no, we're not happy about this. This needs to change. So it's about listening to the people that this affects directly, and that's essential.
Hayley, Jamie, do you have anything to add?
I think it just adding on to it. I mean, in terms of when you first get the PIP application, obviously it comes with a deadline. This is more kind of on the practical steps in terms of know that you can call your DWP to extend that deadline. Know that, as Tom alluded to, the capacity of organisations like ourselves and Citizens Advice, and we have a couple of others locally who assist with disability forms. We're not always going to have the immediate capacity right there and then, but you can call your DWP for obviously for an extension, and a lot of time we've seen a lot of success with that. Obviously it'll still get backdated as well, and it's also just known to keep faith in kind of the system. I mean, it gets quite, I can imagine can get quite demoralizing in terms of if your first application fails and you undertake a mandatory consideration, it's in the majority of them do not succeed. I think 33% of mandatory considerations only led to an award change in the past 5 years. However, when you get to tribunal, the stage after mandatory consideration, it almost switches to 2/3 success as a change of an award. So I think it's 69% of appeals are changed. So it's about kind of having faith, and it's also about making sure you reach out to support in whichever area you may reside in, and making sure you get that expert support in place.
Thank you. And for you, Mark, kind of from a person with lived experience, what advice would you give to another disabled person or neurodivergent person when they're trying to fill out the form and know what to put on the form?
Well, as a person, particularly earlier on in my MS journey, my disease was fluctuating, and it is not dishonest to put down your worst day. That is an entirely honest interpretation of your of yourself. Even if one day you can then get out and dance on a table drinking tequila, that's fine. But you do need to portray your worst self as an honest portrayal. And secondly, like I said, I know anxiety is inevitable, but if you're honest and fair with and as clear as you can be, with or without support, you will likely get there, whether the first time or after appeal. You will get the bloody thing, but it just takes too long.
Yeah.
Hayley, is there anything you'd add to that?
Just a really simple, practical thing. Keep copies of everything, particularly when you're doing the initial forms, because then when it comes to review at the moment, they all, on the review side of things, they always ask question based on the initial form.
Mm-hmm.
So it would just help to have that to refer back to. And the same with in the assessment. It's always handy to have written down in front of you what you wrote. So if you get questions about it, you can refer back to it.
Thank you. And I think just adding on to that, also, they often say when you phone up to request the PIP form, letters from family and friends are accepted, but they're not always kind of the most kind of, they don't often hold the same weight as a letter from your doctor or a medical professional. And so I've put a list on, or I will put a list on the Spicy by Design website of kind of evidence that would be good to support your claim. And there's also other information on the website around kind of the process from phoning up through to the tribunal at the end. So please go and check that out as well. I'll put it in the caption below. Just to kind of draw this to a close, we've mentioned the TIMS review that's happening and kind of what's going on in the background. What for you, Mark, would be one kind of hope for the future around PIP and kind of the process?
That they consult people with lived experience in the process. That would be it. Not white men in suits in Westminster pronouncing on this lesser people. Chandy, I'm thinking back to you. Maybe your fault was getting a degree, achieving as a disabled person. Maybe you should have failed in that and you might have got a better review on your PIP. I'm joking there, but just this view of us as lesser people We are human beings with equal rights, but with expertise in our own disability, but also very often in disability as a whole. So please, all the MPs that are going to be tuning into this podcast or this broadcast, please involve the people you are impacting in the review system.
I think that's really important because I know that the previous government and this one have both received comment from the UN on kind of their lack of involvement of disabled people, when that is something that we should be doing as common kind of practice is involving the people that's affected. So I'm going to soundbite that and put it all over the internet, and hopefully someone will see it for you, Mark.
Good.
For you, Jamie, what would be one thing that you'd want to come out of this kind of review process and kind of hopes for the future?
I think it's just fairness across the board. At the minute, we have a very kind of limited scope on daily activities that we mark, how capable someone is on day-to-day life. And I really feel that emphasis is wrong. It's kind of very negative to think about kind of what you can't do rather than what you can do. But also it's very limited in scope. Neurodiversity is hard to fit into some of those questions, or kind of hard to justify in some cases. And I think that's what, just fairness across the board in the criteria, and just an efficient kind of reward system as well. No long waits, just an efficiency, which I think is achievable.
Thank you. And Tom and Hayley?
Do you want me to go? So I was going to say, and I just want to concur with Mark. I mean, the co-production of the reforms with disabled people is essential. You can't achieve anything in life and in society if you don't actually consult the people who this affects. I think for me, the one thing that I'd really like to see in terms of changes to improve the system as a whole is about challenging stigma and misinformation. This is our opportunity. We've touched so many times on the misinformation about PIP being an in-work benefit. The reality is it needs to be challenged, and that misinformation needs to be challenged, and because that leads to stigma and sort of struggle for people as well. So that would be my thing: challenge stigma and misinformation.
Did you have anything to add, Hayley?
Yeah, I obviously agree from a lived experience from what Mark was saying about making sure disabled people are consulted first off. I also think that it's important, once they've done that, to give time for the process to change, and to make people aware of what the changes are. So support organisation like Citizens Advice can put the support in place before the actual changes happen, because even with the discussions, it seemed like everything was such a rush, and they were going to put all of these changes out pretty quickly, and the people that are able to support them wouldn't have been able to get their capacity in place to be able to do that. So alongside listening to us, I think it's important to give it an appropriate time frame, so that the people that will be like Citizens Advice that could support the clients if needed have the time to put in to put in place what we can to help them with the process more. So I think that's really important, on top of everything else and everyone said.
Thank you. I think as well, there is a load of charities that have templated letters online. So if you're unsure of what to say to your MP when you are contacting them, there's a way you can contact them without you having to worry about the language that you're using and stuff. And kind of how, like, it adds a bit more kind of structure to it and a bit more weight if it's coming through a collective organisation as well as yourself. So if you are worried about how to reach out to your MP, there's loads of charities that can support with that. I know Scope and the Trussell Trust had some letters online as well, where you could email them directly to your MP. So, and also just, I guess, know your rights and stuff. And so if you are worried or concerned, speak to someone like Citizens Advice or other charities who are aware of the legislation. But I want to finish by saying thank you to all of you for giving your time to talk about PIP today, because I know it's an important topic for a lot of people right now. And I know that we're not at the end of the process. I know we still have a long way to go. And I remember sitting with my MP a couple of weeks ago and saying, what happens if the review happens and then no changes happen? Or the changes are what they've already they've announced, and so there's no point in you've had a review for nothing. And he was hopeful that there might be some change. So I think there could be a lot of good that could come out of this. Obviously, we have to be very mindful that it could go another way that we don't want it to go, but having that collective voice and sharing your thoughts is so important. And we brought out the change for the review because of standing up and sharing those concerns. So there is a way forward to kind of get to where we need to be to make it more inclusive and accessible to disabled people. So yeah, thank you all for joining me.
Thank you, Chandy.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having me.
Nice to meet you all.